I have a confession to make. I used to be an extremely slow learner. When I was younger, I would spend ages trying to memorize things that other people seemed to pick up effortlessly. It didn't matter if it was a new language, a musical instrument, or even just some random facts for a school project. I would always struggle. And the worst part is that I didn't even know why I was struggling. It wasn't until I learned about a simple concept that changed everything. And that concept is this. We learn in chunks, not words. Let me explain what I mean by that. When we try to learn something new, most of us tend to focus on the individual pieces of information. For example, when learning a new language, we might focus on memorizing individual words and their meanings. Or when learning a musical instrument, we might focus on memorizing individual notes and how to play them. But the problem with this approach is that it doesn't take into account the way that our brains work. You see, our brains are wired to recognize patterns and to make connections between different pieces of information. So instead of focusing on the individual pieces, we can try to learn in chunks. This means that we should try to learn groups of information together as a single unit. For example, instead of memorizing individual words in a language, we can try to learn phrases or sentences. And instead of memorizing individual notes on an instrument, we can try to learn scales or chord progressions. There are many benefits to learning in chunks rather than words. First, it is simply more efficient. Our brains can process and store information much more efficiently when it is presented in larger chunks. This is because when we learn in chunks, we are essentially taking advantage of our brain's ability to recognize patterns and to make connections. By grouping information together, we are forcing our brains to find the connections between the different pieces of information. And this process of making connections is actually how our brains store memories. So by learning in chunks, we are essentially taking advantage of our brain's natural memory processes. Another benefit of learning in chunks is that it leads to deeper understanding. When we learn in chunks, we are forced to think about how the different pieces of information fit together. This helps us to develop a deeper understanding of the topic at hand. For example, if we are learning about fractions, we might start by learning the definitions of numerator and denominator. But if we really want to understand the concept of fractions, we need to learn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. We also need to understand how fractions relate to each other. So instead of learning each of these concepts separately, we can learn them all as part of a single chunk. This will help us to develop a much deeper understanding of fractions. Finally, learning in chunks also leads to better retention. When we learn in chunks, we are essentially taking advantage of our brain's natural memory processes. As I mentioned earlier, our brains store memories in the form of connections. So by learning in chunks, we are essentially building a stronger foundation for our memories. Studies have shown that this leads to improved retention. So how do we actually go about learning in chunks? Well, it's not as easy as it sounds. It takes practice and discipline. But here are a few tips to help you get started. First, identify the main concepts you need to learn. Once you have identified the main concepts, break them down into smaller chunks. Try to group related concepts together. And then use active recall and spaced repetition to consolidate and memorize the chunks. Learning in chunks is a powerful study technique that can help you learn faster, deeper, and longer. It is not easy to learn, but the benefits are definitely worth it. So if you are struggling to learn something new, try changing the way you approach learning. Start learning in chunks, and I promise you, will see a huge difference. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about how to learn more effectively, check out my other videos. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.